Hello, friends. Patrick McFarland here, back after being sick all week. So I apologize to my audience for not putting out any content. I'm very, very pleased to be joined today by Stephen. He is the head of AnarchoChristian, the Facebook page, a pretty popular one, and I've been meaning to have him on the show for quite some time. Very excited for that. We're going to be discussing, among other things, subjective versus objective reality or morality, rather. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to you, Stephen. How's it going today?
Hey Patrick, thanks for having me on. And yeah, it's we've been trying to do this for a while. I'm glad our schedules finally worked out.
Yeah, yeah. And man, it's been one heck of a week. So, how was your week? You're a pretty busy guy, aren't you?
Yeah, I've got a full-time, job that keeps me busy, on call and all that good stuff. So yeah, pretty busy.
Yeah. So I've been really excited because there's a whole bunch of new content producers and friends of ours. Uh, Ours being the Libertarian Union. There's a whole bunch of us who are starting their own podcasts, and you're one of them, actually. So, do you want to tell us a little bit about your show? You got one episode out, I think.
Yeah, pretty exciting. We rolled it out last week, and it's with Pax Libertas production and Roger Paxton's group, and very exciting. We've got, I want to say, yeah, two episodes. One's kind of an introduction, and then the other one is our first, you know, real episode, I guess you could say. And we should have another one coming out this weekend, and trying to do a once a week or once every 2 weeks episode.
Oh, okay, yeah. That's kind of a good, when you're first starting, it's hard to decide how often you're going to put out content. But that sounds pretty good, and I didn't get a chance, unfortunately. I committed a mortal sin and I didn't listen to your episode beforehand because I've been so busy this week. But from what I saw, your graphic design looks so good. It looks really nice, and I'm sure the show's very well structured. So,
I appreciate it, and that's all Roger on that one. I reached out to him to kind of talk about the podcasting thing, and when it was still just the thought stage, and he has just been a tremendous help in getting it off the ground and polishing it up, much more than what I could do on my own.
yeah, it's a great thing he's got going there. I mean, I've seen several shows. I think the ANCAP Barbershop is in the Libertarian
Uh,
Union too, but
mhm.
yeah, that's just the way it goes. But yeah, so why don't we? I forgot to mention when we first started that the show notes for this will be up at libertyweekly.net/54. They're not up yet, but there is also a video version of the podcast, which is live streaming to YouTube right now. That will be included in that show notes page as well. So why don't you? Do you just want to talk about why you started Anarcho Christian, and why do you think that Christians specifically would be receptive to the messages of liberty?
Yeah, it's a fairly new blog site and Facebook page, and the whole project is new. It's a little over a year old, I think, at this point. And I started it just because for a couple of reasons. One, there's a lack of material out there for the Christian anarchism subject, and so I wanted to kind of contribute to that, and I think I more or less started with the idea that it would kind of be a hub for all of the material that's out there, because there's guys that are around right now that are writing on the subject, and there's also a ton of information from the past that has to do specifically with the topic, and just with Christians being anti-war, and just anything that we touch on. So there was really a lack of that information out there, and even in my own life, just wanting to find more of that. And I just kept digging and digging and finding more and more stuff, and it just seemed like a great idea to kind of contribute where I could, and even start putting out my own thoughts on the subject.
Awesome. And when we were speaking earlier, you kind of mentioned that you wanted it to be more of a non-denominational thing. Um, can you speak to that? I mean, obviously, you don't want to um, limit your viewership.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's it's there's a lot of divides in Christianity when it comes to faith and doctrine, and that's something that we didn't want to focus on, is to make you know anarcho-Baptist or anarcho-Lutheran or anarcho-Catholic or something like that. Those would be great outlets in their own, but that's not what I wanted out of AnarchoChristian. And so my focus has been to present people of either anarchist or anti-state perspectives, and the one the one qualifier is that they say that they're Christian. They profess their Christianity, and there's people that we share that I don't agree with when it comes to subjects of theology, but um, we still promote their thoughts as far as the Christian anarchism is concerned. And it was a little bit of a hurdle at first, because in Christianity, your faith and your what you understand about the Bible is very, very important. So it almost seems wrong for a moment to start promoting someone who might have conflicting thoughts when it comes to theology. So that's something that we've dealt with a little bit with our readers, that they've contacted me and said, I can't, I want to like this, but I can't do it because so and so believes in such and such. So, and that's usually where I go into what it is that we're trying to do, and just focus on the Christian, the professing yourself a Christian aspect. And I'm not using the anarcho-Christian platform to judge someone's particular theology, but we're focused on the political aspect of where they're coming from with their faith.
And I just want to mention you're cutting out a little bit when with your. I don't know if you can do much of that. Just to the audience, the internet went out at Steven's house before we started doing this, and so he's on his right
Yes.
now. So apologies for that, but so just to throw another question at you, I myself I grew up Lutheran, and while I don't identify as a Christian now, I guess I would say that I do believe in some kind of higher power, and I'm receptive to that. But it seems to me, and this has been, Tom Woods has talked about this, but how people who have faith in a higher power aside from the state are receptive to the messages of liberty, and I've noticed that specifically. But is that something you try to talk to in with AnarchoChristian?
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think Tom Woods is right there, that you see a lot of people who say that they're a Christian and profess their faith in Christ, and the message of liberty and the message that that we get when we kind of look at the American Revolution and the founding of this country, they're very open to those concepts. They readily say, "I agree with this," and that's one of the catalysts for anarcho-Christian, is that I think that anyone involved in the liberty movement that is a Christian or knows a lot about uh, Christian values, that there's an obvious uh, issue between what we see from I guess you could say, the American Christian conservative, and and what we know are a different set of values than what we're seeing. So that was definitely a catalyst to this, and I think that a lot of the stuff that you see coming from the website or from the Facebook and Twitter pages sometimes poking at those inconsistencies.
Okay. And so when it comes to You kind of blacked out there for a little bit in some of that response, but I'm just gonna. One thing you did mention was the ideas of the American Revolution, and with I was listening to Prof. CJ on the Dangerous History podcast, and he was kind of talking about how, a lot of the impetus behind natural rights theories and the ideas the colonists had were actually spread more so than the founding fathers were actually spread to by preachers in the colonies, and talking about your God-given duty to protect your natural rights. And I think that's so cool. I mean, you see, tying this into our theme tonight of morality, of objective and subjective morality. I just think that, there's a lot of people who believe in natural rights think that they are bestowed by the creator, or that they're part of your humanity. But I think it's great that you mentioned that part about the revolution, just that these preachers were preaching that. And are you familiar with Prof. CJ at all?
Yeah, I love his podcast, and I did listen to the Revolution series that he did, and it's excellent. And I totally agree. If I'm not mistaken, I think that the war, when it first kicked off, what it was known as in England was something along the lines of the Protestant um, Revolution, or the something to that effect. It was known by the faith of the people that were involved in it.
Yeah. And that was I never knew that, just this and to speak more towards our topic, I had this idea of how I would segue into it. But do you listen to Thaddeus Russell at all?
Yes,
Okay, so he had Dave Smith on. Did you listen to that episode?
I have not heard that one. No.
Okay, so in it, they get to talking about subjective versus objective morality. And I'll try and be brief with this, but basically, Thaddeus Russell is saying that, well, the problem with objective reality, and he mentioned the American Revolution, is that the founding fathers came up with this idea, and Thaddeus Russell totally butchered what Thomas Jefferson said in the Declaration of Independence. And he was talking about how he construed Thomas Jefferson as saying that all men are created equal, and he was saying that's wrong because some men are born tall and some men are born short. Is he can't be arguing that, can he?
I Wow, I hope not. I've never heard that, actually. I've never heard that perspective on those words.
But yeah, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to like. I'm trying to bring this into what he said, but he was saying that uh morality can't be objective because, well, he said first some men are born tall and some aren't, and some are born into wealth. And I mean, the whole idea, as we know, is that Thomas Jefferson said every man is born created equal in that they have inalienable rights, not that they're born equal
Right.
wealth. And so he's saying that, and Thaddeus went on to say that objective morality is wrong because if you believe in objective morality, then the implication is that you have a duty to submit other people to your objective morality. And that has led to wars of aggression in the Middle East. And what do you?
Yeah, and I don't agree that for morality to be objective, that you have to force people to believe the same thing. I mean, if something is wrong or right, it is, regardless of if the other person is tall, short, rich, poor, or even agrees with you. And that's really where a lot of people do take issue with anarcho-Christian, that where they accuse the idea of being contradictory, and because of I think that the morals might be one of the driving factors for that. And but again, I believe that morals are objective, but that doesn't necessarily mean uh, I have to create a state entity to force you to believe or to comply with my understanding of morals.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think that they're objectively provable in nature, other than another thing. And I'm sorry I didn't bring this up to you earlier, this Thaddeus Russell episode being the impetus behind this, but uh, he was saying that there's no evidence, absolutely zero evidence in nature of morality being objective. And I just didn't see this. And one thing I wanted to get your perspective on was a big reason why I think that morality is objective is because you see it time and time again in the religions of the world is the embodiment of the non-aggression principle, articulated in different ways, but thou shalt not steal. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that it's objective that stealing is wrong, and that is a conversation that happens quite a bit with people of the communist ideology. Um, that's a common conversation on AnarchoChristian from someone who considers himself an ANCOM or and bases that in their Christian values. There's always a conversation on when is it okay to steal from somebody, and we still need to understand that when we're told thou shalt not steal, stealing is objectively wrong. And of course, I'm bringing that from my Christian faith. And if someone doesn't share that Christian faith, they might have a different opinion. But that value, that moral, is still objective, whether someone agrees with it or not. And I would go further to say that I haven't really met someone that didn't feel somewhat slighted if they were robbed from, if they were stolen from. I mean, even if you think that you should let someone have it because they have less money than you, or that maybe you feel that they really need it, you still understand that they took it from you without asking.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm hearkening back to a Tom Woods episode where he had Gerard Casey on, and he was talking about how children have this innate sense of fairness in them, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe,
Right.
yeah, and maybe I'm not articulating that well because he said it very, very well. But they do, kids. But then again, kids have to be taught other things too. But I think inherent to that kind of system is this knowledge of what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah, kids know when another kid stole something from them, and they get upset about it.
Yeah, and they don't have to be taught that either. It's just
Right.
something that they know. Hey, that was mine, and you have it now.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. So, well, I was going to bring Murray Rothbard into this because I think Murray Rothbard is believes in objective morality, and I'm going to cite this Mises article. It's titled "On Mises's Ethical Relativism," and so I think Mises was a relativist and Rothbard was an objectivist, not Ayn Rand style, but Rothbard says, I think it important to delineate briefly what relativism is and what the issues are on this important topic. Let us first consider the polar opposite of relativism, which is absolutism. The absolutist believes that man's mind, employing reason, which according to some absolutists is divinely inspired, as we discussed just now, according to others is given by nature, is capable of discovering and knowing truth, including the truth about reality and the truth about what is best for man and best for himself as an individual. And I agree with that statement. There was this big debate in some Facebook group. I think Stephen Clyde, who was a friend that was going to join us for this episode, kind of instigated it. But I have so much trouble working through this because I think there are objective truths. But then again, what do you say to someone who thinks that prostitution is immoral?
Right. Well, it is technically immoral, but again, we don't have to form a state entity to squash it out either, and that's really where we're able to, with anarcho-Christian, to I think meet all of what libertarianism and voluntarism we can see eye to eye with that, because we don't have to form a state organization to put people in cages or even execute people for doing something that we do consider immoral.
Mm-hmm. Is it like a would you consider prostitution to be objectively immoral? But so what you're
Yes.
doing is then a balancing test of, okay, well, what would be the bigger immorality would be to prevent that consensual transaction, you know?
Yeah, I think that we definitely we see it play out all the time, that we that we violate morals on the other end of the spectrum while trying to squash it out. And as far as what the how the Bible is concerned, we're not told to, again, form a police squad and brutalize somebody or put them in a cage for doing that.
Mm-hmm. And
And so that that's where we can say 100% if we feel that it's objective and that it's wrong. But I think that maybe something that we haven't seen a lot of in the 20th and 21st century is Christians saying, but I'm still not going to put you in a cage for it.
yeah. And I think that's such an important point to make because, myself coming from a Christian background, um, there is that tendency, and to give lip service to Thaddeus Russell's point, he's right that the implication of moral objectivity would be that, well, we need to make everyone else moral too. And I think the problem is maybe the communists would think that communism is objectively moral, so the implication there is
Right,
that
right.
we have to go spread communism. But I don't think that.
Which ends up being,
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
no, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was thinking to a conversation I had today with someone, and it was about the communist values, and it. I've met people who say that they are communist, but they do not support, uh, you know, the monopoly on violence of the state. But it's always come later in the conversation where at some point they will endorse violence, the use of violence against someone for not um, contributing to the community, under the rules of communism. And that's just always been something that stood out to me, that you can say that you're, an anarcho-communist, but the moment that we're talking about approving violence to be used on someone just because they're not following your rules, if they're not wanting to voluntarily give or to voluntarily, be a part of a contract, then you're approving to use violence against them. And now we have a real contradiction here.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And like, well, one thing that I was thinking of is that, well, then the problem is not with objective morality to pick apart, Thaddeus Russell. And I hope I'm not strawmanning him, but I really think that this is the crux of his argument, that the problem is not that morality isn't objective. The problem is that their objective morality is wrong, that they have the wrong objective morality, and that the objective morality of non-aggression is the correct objective morality. Yeah. And that was just such a good conversation, and this is something that I've been playing around with myself in my mind. So would you would come down on the side, I guess, then that morality is completely objective then?
Yes.
Yeah. And I mentioned this to my mother-in-law. I was like, and so my mother-in-law is LDS Mormon. She's a convert. She's very devout. And I asked her whether morality was objective or subjective, and she told me subjective, dummy. And I I didn't understand because, she's a Christian, and I think that Christianity would imply objective morality, or, can you speak to that? Definitely, the
Right.
Commandments are objective morals, right?
I agree. I think that it does. And where we can get way off in the weeds on that is that someone can say that it's not, but that doesn't mean that it's not. So, and you can also have a difference in opinions on. You can say that it is objective, and then we can go down the road of which things are right and wrong. And people, you're going to find people, even a very close relation within faith and theology, you're going to find people, um, choosing when something is wrong and when something is right, and that's going to vary a lot. But that doesn't mean that the actual moral that we are discussing is subjective just because different people have different opinions.
Yeah. And I guess maybe that goes to the some people have the wrong objective morality,
Right.
that point that I well, before we keep going here, I have to remember that we just got the Liberty Weekly podcast got its first sponsor officially here, and I'm gonna screen share here for a second if I can, if that'll work. Well, it's gotenna.com, and I'm very excited to be sponsored by them. Gotenna.com, Gotenna Mesh, is a tiny but mighty device that pairs with any smartphone to enable the first 100% off-grid mobile long-range consumer-ready mesh network. And it attaches right to your cell phone so that you don't need cell phone towers or cell phone service. And this is the grassroots kind of thing that we've been talking about. People are creating mesh networks with Wi-Fi, with internet. Well, this is for your cell phone, and it works right with that. It is affordable. And we're really excited that Gotenna has decided to partner up with the Liberty Weekly podcast here. If you go to gotenna.com, that's GOTENNA.com, and enter the promo code Liberty35, you'll get a special offer as listeners of the Liberty Weekly podcast. So very excited about that. But yeah, as we were saying, Stephen, this has just been something that I've been playing around with in my mind. And I've always kind of tended towards morality being objective. Maybe it's my Christian background. But yeah, I'm glad that you were able to come on and hash it out. As we've kind of discussed that, do you want to talk a little bit about what brought you to libertarianism?
Yeah, it's really the truth behind libertarianism that I think everybody at some point wakes up to, and the story is not a whole lot different than a lot of other people today that we talk to. It's Ron Paul running for president, and just hearing those ideas come from him was something different. And it took me a little while, though. I wasn't someone who heard that and was immediately on board with it. I was still indoctrinated with the lesser of two evils sort of voting. We've got to vote for the winner sort of person. But I know that seed was planted with with Ron Paul's uh, presidential runs, and just started looking into some of the major names, Rothbard, Mises. Started listening to podcasts, and the Tom Woods show was a really big one for me. And but yeah, it's pretty similar to a lot of people right now, just with the same names, the same books. But I started examining what I saw in my own life and in I came from a very neocon background, and just kind of examining the people around me, the people in the Republican Party, and the people that were voting on to save the world, and just seeing this stark contradiction between that ideology and the Christian values that they proudly wave and parade, and my values. And as I started digging deeper and deeper into it, like a lot of people do when they do with libertarianism, there's a tired joke that I like. And what's the difference between a libertarian and an anarchist? It's 6 weeks or 6 months or whatever. So that's really what happened. I heard about this thing called libertarianism, jumped on it right away after reading it and seeing how it was consistent in its own belief and consistent with my faith. And, you know, then you start looking at everything differently.
Yeah. And one thing I always kind of, I got my new hat, my antiwar.com hat.
Yeah, it's
It's
nice.
Yeah, well, I printed it with Zazzle and I didn't get it through antiwar.com, so I feel bad, but I'm going to donate. I'm going to donate so this isn't official merch, but um the biggest thing I guess for me is just this disconnect between, and I've done some shows on this, but the disconnect between the neocons and them being conservative, but also that they hearken to Christian values and they use it to spread war. And it just doesn't make sense to me, this disconnect between thou shalt not kill. I mean, pretty
Right.
plain language there, and killing in war. And there's that meme I always think of, and it's pretty bold, but it's the soldier they're shooting, and Jesus is over his shoulder and says, nice shot, that kid never saw it coming.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, what has your experience been trying to spread the values of liberty to, have people in the Christian faith been receptive, on that message, that anti-war message?
It's tough. It's really tough, especially the anti-war thing, because I mean, obviously, you and I are at a point where we can look back over the worship of war, the war drumming, and all of that, and just even see the indoctrination that's built in, the fear that's used to propagandize the whole thing, and it's a really tough sell because with Christian conservatives because it is now so wrapped up and intertwined with their faith, and of course I think that there's a problem there. I think that there's a contradiction. We can have a discussion on how far do we take self-defense. There's a large group of Christian anarchists that are 100% pacifist. Um, and I think that that's a great conversation to have. Holding that up against, how far do we take our own personal defense or defense of someone else? But the wars as they are today and as we see them are just nowhere near that. The amount of civilians that are killed on a daily basis is something that all Christians, when we say we're pro-life, we should have a problem with that, and we should recognize that the life that we are pro isn't just the American baby in the womb. It's a child, in Syria or Yemen or wherever. It's all life.
Yeah, definitely. And well, one thing I admire about Christians, and I'm a little biased, but LDS in particular, is the fact that they will go abroad. They'll go abroad, they'll do missions, and they will help people. Um, but then again, you don't see them out in the streets campaigning against the wars. As
Right.
well, you do something.
Right. And
Sorry.
yeah, there's a contradiction there. There is a cognitive dissonance that's very real, and it's very quick. You can get into that conversation very quickly on where the disconnect is, and usually it doesn't go over very well because of how much emotion is wrapped up into the war state. Um, but that's the conversation we have on a daily basis through the website and through our social media pages.
Oh, hold on a second. You still there?
Yep, I'm still here.
Okay, you want to say what you just said? I'm sorry.
No worries.
I think you were saying that you've seen on the page.
Oh, the conversation with people that are very conservative, I hate to generalize and broad brush too much, but that we do have these categories that have some pretty easy descriptions, and so with your American Christian conservative, generally very pro-war, very pro-state, very nationalistic, and I think pointing out those nationalistic values and how they contradict our Christian values. That's something that we do a lot through our site and our social media. But it's usually met with some anger, and it's something that we work through though. And I've had a lot of great conversations with people that were kind of on the fence about it or feeling there was something wrong with it, and that's really what I want most out of our site is to just present some of these other ideas. I'm not a pastor. I'm not, I don't have a psychology degree or anything like that. But I think that it's obvious to everyone, even if you're not a Christian, it's obvious that there's a contradiction between what the Christian says and what the Christian does, especially when it comes to nationalism and supporting war.
Yeah, and so what one phrase that I've seen on your page a lot is "no king but Christ," and I wanted to talk about that specifically with my family in mind. I won't, my in-laws, but also, my parents are Christian. I don't know how devout they are, but there's this idea of no king but Christ, and in the conservative community, I'm thinking my dad especially, he will recoil at the mention of anarchy or the word anarchy or stateless or anything like that. And that cognitive dissonance, how I guess what I want to ask is how effective is that phrase "no king but Christ"? Because the state is a king. This, you either
Yeah.
worship the state or you worship God or something else. So how effective has that phrase been, and what is the meaning behind it?
I've seen it go both ways. I've seen it be immediately well received, and I've seen it offend somebody. There's a Christian is always supposed to refer back to the Bible for anything. That's where we talk about that objective morality and objective understanding. It goes back to a standard, a set standard. And so for the Christian, that's the Bible. And there are, of course, there's ways to read the Bible where you're just picking out pieces that agree with you, and you can make it mean whatever you want. And so there are verses there that seem like it supports a king, or that if there is a king over you, then you have to 100%, back that king. And that's generally, I think, what when you say that people will kind of recoil on that phrase, that's the sort of thinking that's led them to that is some of those verses and the way that we can teach those verses that it means that you have to support that king 100%. Of course, uh, that when people do that, especially Christians today, uh, we're only thinking of our country that we grew up seeing "God Bless America" on the bumper stickers and on the windows at the store. We're only thinking about that as our king. But when you present that, if you're going to say with blanketed that God has put that king in place, well, then you've got to understand that he could be a bad king. He could be one of those kings that you hate and that you're glad that we used our army to stomp them out. They were a king as well. So that gets way off into the weeds, but that's one of those things where when we start talking about the contradictions and just how ingrained all of that is and how intertwined the faith and the faith in God and faith in country is. I mean, it gets really deep into the Bible and into this verse versus that verse, and then looking at the whole thing as a whole.
Yeah, and well, more to that, I guess a common critique that you would get from people who would who abhor religion, maybe some militant atheists or whatever, would point out that the throughout history the church has been used, and maybe this is an ignorant argument, I don't know because I'm not that well versed in it, but maybe the church has been used throughout history as a tool of the state. And what would you say to that?
Yeah, you know, it has. and but that's happened with a few other faiths as well, and I mean it's even happened with atheism too. You know that, and so I think that what we need to do though is kind of put aside that and just focus on it's always the state though.
Yeah,
You know,
that the state.
if it's
Yeah.
Christians that have formed a state that is being oppressive, or if it's Muslims that have formed a state that's being oppressive, or if it's atheists that have formed a state that's being oppressive, the you know the common denominator here is the it's always a state.
Hmm. And well, one thing I was also thinking of is that maybe this is a little detracting from that point, but I was reading in Scott Horton's awesome book, Fool's Errand, that one thing that surprised me is that, a lot of radical Islamic terrorists are actually terrorists first and Islamists second, in that a lot of them actually aren't very devout and they don't know the Quran very well, and that they participate in immoral things that are against Islam. And, on the other side, you have George Bush saying, invoking the Bible and invoking God before we go over and destroy the hell out of Iraq. So yeah, I think what you said, is pertinent, is that usually it's the state propagating the violence using a cloak of Christianity or Islam.
Yes, yeah, I completely agree. You know, it gets into a lot of history, when we're pointing fingers at one organization or another. But, when you look at the rise of militant Islam, uh, there's always the United States uh, funneling weapons and money and training right there behind them. So you can't tell me it's strictly about a faith that, and that goes for Christians during different crusades and things like that, and
Yeah, yeah,
I guess you could use Christian in quotation marks there, you know.
yeah. I mean, well, at the end of the day, it's about empire. If you're talking about the Crusades, it's about empire, not God. You know,
Exactly. It was furthering that state to move, to cover more land and more areas, and eventually just enslave more people.
yeah, and and the reverse would be true too. When you get, well, if you're talking about terrorism, if some foreign entity occupied the United States and some crazy right wing kind of Christian, I don't know, Christian groups or whatever groups start bombing things, and invoking terror, I'm sure that would happen.
Right.
You know? Yeah, or you would
Yep.
have Antifa or something. I'm not sure, but yeah, well, I think we should maybe bring this to a close a little bit here. Do you, and one last, do you want to plug your stuff, send people to your site?
Yeah, I appreciate it. So we have the website at anarchochristian.com, and we have a Facebook page and a Twitter page and an Instagram. And we also have a podcast that we just kicked off. And so you can find us on any of the places where you download or stream podcast, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, YouTube. We'd be happy for you to stop by any of those places and just let us know what you think.
Awesome. Yeah. And they would search Anarcho Christian, and it's also anarchochristian.com. So ANARCHO Christian.com.
Yeah, all one word. And
Okay.
that's the same for any of the platforms.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. I had to think out because I'm not a good speller. I can't visualize letters in my mind. So I'd be like, did I spell anarcho correctly? Yeah, well, no, I'm so glad to finally be talking to you and to have you on the show. And like this week was a little bit hectic, so I didn't get to plan and organize as much as I would have liked to. But I definitely want to have you back on the show sometime soon. I these from my past, I guess Christianity is a big part of that. And while I don't, I guess, when I identify as a Christian, I get along very well with your types.
Well, I appreciate it. And, that's one thing that we don't necessarily have to agree to just have a good conversation, you know?
Yeah, likewise. I mean,
Uh,
sorry. Go ahead.
no, okay. Well, you mentioned Prof. CJ and the Dangerous History podcast. And I remember one time I was listening to one of his shows. I can't remember which one, but he made the remark as an atheist that he would rather have an anarchist Christian as a neighbor than a statist atheist. And I think it's because as long as we can, just agree to not, aggress on each other, we're going to be all right. We don't have to force each other to agree with a particular ideology, as long as we just agree that we're not going to use force on each other.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, in the last thing that I want, I don't want someone to stop listening to me because they disagreed with something I said. I want them to tell me that I'm wrong and why I'm wrong, but
Right.
yeah. So that's been Steven with AnarchoChristian. Really excited to have you on, buddy. Looking forward to talk to you soon in the future.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing me on, and definitely let's do this again.
Most definitely. All right. Goodbye, everybody.